those behavioral responses, those flashbulb memories, they're there through an evolutionary construct. And that's, I think, such useful information when our brain is grappling with depression and anxiety or suicidal considerations, or just trying to find a way to keep breathing fundamentally. Because our brain's good at keeping us alive. It's its number one job. It's not so good at reading the instruction manuals that the 21st century has handed to us for a thriving life.
There are people in your life that you will meet that will either be there for a moment, a season, or a lifetime, right? You've heard this before. And somehow, some way, no matter how much time they are in your life, because it's just a measurement of time, right? You need to decide the role that they're going to play, especially as life is going forward. And I'm not only talking about those positive moments either, because life is truly about contrast. It's about growth. It's about finding balance, personal development, right? And Dr. Kate Truitt knows that all too well. If the name sounds familiar, it's because she has been here on the Holistically Speaking podcast before. And she was here talking about her first book, Healing in Your Hands, which was the story of really how we can put self-healing and self-havening into our lives. But now she's back with something much more personal. And I am so elated to have you here, Kate. Kate the Great, as I call you. Someone I consider a friend, a mentor, especially in the world of havening. And you're an award-winning clinical psychologist, neuroscientist, internationally recognized for your work in trauma and stress and resiliency. But more so, you are just a human being going through this life like anybody else with your own story. And that is really what your newest book is about, Keep Breathing. And I'm just so glad I get time to share space with you again. It's always a gift.
Yeah. Well, and right back at you, Hilary. Thank you so much for inviting me on. And you are a friend and a dear colleague, and I admire you so much. And so I'm really excited to share about Keep Breathing and to dig in.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, we are all just humans doing our best.
Yeah. Like there's one quote that I love, Kate, and it's, we're all just walking each other home, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of something that you and I have talked about before, especially with this journey that you're sharing in Keep Breathing that we're going to get into. But the whole idea that the old school, the old way of therapy and psychology and sitting across from your therapist, feeling like you're being judged in a way like, tell me all your feelings, has really changed, because now we're seeing more of the traditional therapy, including parts of ourselves so that you can share with your clients and your patients to let them know I'm human too. And that's so much about what we're reading in this newest book, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's about connection fundamentally. And the purpose of this book in so many respects was to highlight what you just said. When we're a psychotherapist and we're trained and we've got the license, we've got the things, we're put into this expert role. And sure, there's a lot of information that we have. And on the other hand, the number one thing that supports the healing journey is connection and rapport. And when we're invited to divorce our humanity from the healing process, sure, there are some reasons for that clinically why we do that. And on the other hand, in a world where disconnection is the rule of thumb, as our job now as empaths, as healers, is to be a connecting space.
It really is
so
about
the hope
that.
for the book was, is to highlight, hey, you can know a lot of things, and at the end of the day, just a human brain doing human things.
I think it also goes back to not just connection, but a trust in knowing that as we're walking through this life, we're going to be impacted. We are going to be touched, moved, and inspired by different things that come into our lives. And how do we process? How do we go through these things? And I think that's what makes your book a little different than just a traditional memoir. You're sharing this really deep part of yourself through years. And this book just isn't about grief. This is so much further. You actually said this is part autobiography and part scientific exploration. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, it's raw. I think the tagline that keeps coming back and being reflected to me is, it took me 5 years to write this book. And for context, my first book I wrote in 8 months. And I love my first book. But this book took 5 years, and it took 10 years to be able to write it, because it does dig into not only the sudden traumatic loss of my fiance a week before our wedding, and it's actually the opening chapter is me going to give the eulogy. And then it uses my story as the case study, told in real deep, first person, intimate terms of understanding the impacts of childhood trauma, of chronic illness and pain, of suicidal considerations, and grappling with that very real human darkness that can seep into our souls and hold us captive for so long. And fundamentally, also, it's a love story about coming home to self and learning how to partner with our mind and our body and our soul so that we can show up in the world around us, no matter what's happening. And then, of course, because I'm a science geek, and this is why it took 5 years, really gently integrating the nuances of science into all of that. Why is the brain doing these things? Why are our behaviors showing up in these ways that are deeply painful and negatively impactful on our lives? And I talk a lot about that. Because really, my goal for both of my books was to turn around to my young 16, 17-year-old self, if I could, and say, if only you'd had this data, dear one. And perhaps somebody else now will have the data and it will help them.
Yeah. What would you say to your 16-year-old self now?
It's okay. Hang in there, baby girl.
Yeah.
Hang in there.
Isn't that something we constantly need to say to ourselves? You know, we're not separate from the parts of ourselves that are younger. I mean, all parts matter, as we've heard. You know, that's big in the community. But being able to hold space for that younger part of yourself that's feeling scared or insecure or undecided, you know, showing up for that part of ourselves is really important.
Extremely important. And even the parts of ourselves that are looking at exiting stage left out of life.
Man.
One of the final stories I added into the book was, and this was a big leap that my editor supported me in making, and Chelsea Thompson, thank you, you're amazing, I love you, was really looking at my young 10-year-old self who was struggling with suicidal ideation, and using that as another story to highlight the pain of childhood, the lack of awareness that our young selves can struggle with. And one of the things Chelsea said to me as I wrote the story was, I'm a mom. I don't really think about the fact that my little kiddo could be going to that level of deep despair. I think about anxiety and stress and depression, but I don't think about that for them. And when I told her how young it started for me, that's her brain was like, you please, if you feel like you can safely tell this story, please do.
What's even scarier about that is that you and I grew up in an age where there was no social media. And, you know, my work as a health journalist, I've covered a lot of stories that tap into that area of how social media can have a real negative impact on your emotional well-being. In fact, there have been some statistics, and I've shared them before, on the age group that it's really impacting, you know, that younger age group, the teens into the early 20s even. And, you know, with us not having that and how heavy it was for us then, not having this global village to be able to tap into at the touch of a fingertip, how much more is it now, and how much more important is this type of book to have so that kids know that they are supported, and or the adult in us that's looking back at the child knows they're supported.
I know, right?
You know?
Well, Yeah, and looking at the idea of the
Yeah.
village and how fundamental that is to our deep, deep, beautiful, dear friend, Amy the
Amy.
amygdala,
We
right?
love Amy.
Yeah. And those core values of safety and belonging and lovability and success, being able to get those core needs met, which is something that I've been developing as part of my model for 25 years. But I came up with the idea of Amy when I was a young 20 something working in a rat lab because I couldn't figure out why my brain just wanted me dead. And, and I had an amazing human who shown so much healing and care on me, which was John. And then 10 years later, he died. And that grappling with myself within all of that, and really knowing that as you're sharing, there's our village. And then when we put it into that social media sphere, it escalates exponentially. The pressure and the expectation of these fundamental values that our brains are evolutionarily hardwired to lean into. And so if we feel like what rejection feels like in a home environment, and then we take that to a global populace, and that's what it can feel like in social media, especially for adolescents and teens. And that's why suicide is the number one killer of our young humans these days. It's devastating.
It's beyond devastating. Having to dig into those statistics as both a doctor, a neuroscientist, and also a journalist, the other side of things, to sit and to come from a compassionate place, because you and I are both empaths, as many people who are of service in this work are. It's devastating to sit there and think, how can I help? And in your writing of Keep Breathing, was that something you thought about? Because it is your own healing journey. Writing this, I'm sure, was cathartic, therapeutic. But were you thinking, in writing this, I really want to share some kind of, in a way, it's guidance, a guide that lets people know they're okay just how they are and they're supported?
Yeah. I never would have done it otherwise. It's one thing to pen a story. It's another thing to go through the journey of publishing a book, as I know you're working on your own books, and I know you know so well. The vision for this was so much bigger than me.
Yeah.
My story, and it's interesting, Hilary, because my story used to be a unicorn story of being widowed so young, of grappling with chronic illness, and layering through that the difficulties of a complicated childhood and a complicated mind-body system with health and pain and everything. And then when the pandemic hit, my unicorn story became a normal, devastating story of millions of humans facing unexpected loss and death, of chronic illness seeping into the very fibers of our society. And that was a huge part of what kept me moving forward when many times I wanted to set the book aside. And then the other piece is my fiance, John, who's a victim of the opioid epidemic. And looking at chronic illness and pain and so much that has happened in terms of opioid use at a national level. And now, Netflix has done a great job putting out a lot of really important stories around it. And there's a lot of conversation now, more so than ever. And at the same time, I was a psychologist. I was trained. I was working with individuals who are navigating addiction. And here, my own partner died of an accidental overdose from opioids.
And I remember what hit me with your book was very early on, and I don't want to give this away, but we know that this story is so impactful. But when you went to the blame game and I saw in the quotes, I should have been there, I was like, ugh. And I think that is one of those things that we go through with grief, is how, the anger, the avoidance, and then the blame of what could I have done differently. But you were actually in that space, and to be also working in the space, there's a level up there,
It felt like it. I level up on the guilt and the shame and the judgment and just how I flogged myself emotionally for it.
Yeah.
and carried that because
What
I felt like I failed.
what do you feel was the shift, and that I feel like it's more than just a shift, but where did you really start seeing a change in how you wanted to change the narrative on this story of losing the love of your life a week before your wedding, really coming to terms with what you've been through in your own life as a child with your own illness and your own suicidal ideations? Where was it where Kate said, I got to do something with this?
Um, there was an incident at my offices where a past patient of mine came to the offices with the intention of harming me. And it was a very scary event. And luckily, everybody was fine, and the situation was contained, and the person who needed support got support. And that was one of those moments for me of reconciliation and recognizing that there's so much pain in the world. And the slight sidestep here, but this really deep connection to mental health and wellness are human rights. And therapy is a privilege. And saying that as somebody who runs a group clinic and also has a training institute and a nonprofit, like how do we do everything we can, and then being a part of the Havening community, of course, as one of the co-developers, to create the butterfly effect of larger change. And in the Havening world, it's been really powerful and beautiful to witness how those tools, and that's where I'm the creator of the Healing in Your Hands programs, can be disseminated into the communities. And on the other hand, the education around what's happening in our brains isn't readily available. And one of the things after that incident in my offices that my team continually reflected, and the patients who were in the offices when the event happened, and we had full SWAT on site, 2 helicopters, like this was no joke. One of the things that everybody kept continually reflecting back to me was, thank God I understood my brain and what happened next, and in terms of their own journey. And I told everybody, go get therapy, go get whatever support you need, go do acupuncture, go get whatever you need. Bill me, including all the patients who were there. So my entire team and all the patients, like, just know we've got this. You just send us the invoices, no questions asked, whatever you need. Nobody took me up on it. And for 2 critical reasons. One, everybody went to the offices and applied Havening with their clinicians. And literally one of my clinicians was on the roof with her patient of a 3-story building.
Hey, there's no area that's off limits with this work, is there?
No.
No limits.
Just make it work. And that they understood their brain. Yeah. And that was where the request really for me started to bubble up and say, I've been a specialist in neuroscience and trauma and resilience for going on 20 years now because I needed to make sense of my brain. And I've got a pretty wackadoodle story.
You're using that word. We love that word. Yeah, you do.
And to the point of the expert being, because we as experts were like, oh, they don't really experience this. And then, but we're on the pedestal. And it's like, no. I've had panic attacks in shows. I've done the continual freak out texting with people. And just next thing I know, it's like pages after pages of text messages and nobody's responding. And like, there's a narrative why our brain engages in those behaviors. And they can be so pathologized and instead it's like, no, you're just human.
That I'm so glad you say that, because I've been there too. And the first thing we want to do is shame ourselves for being human and think I should have known better, much like I should have been there, right? We think because we have this higher level of education, LMNOPs after our name, we're on the top of what we do in the world, that we don't feel. And what makes this so beautiful is being vulnerable and courageous to say, oh no, I go through it too, And I'm glad you said that, because I think hearing it from somebody who is in a place and a platform, multiple, and I'm not just talking social media, I mean in general, where people look up to you, we're not untouchable, or you're not untouchable. We're just human beings first,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So you go back to mentioning, you mentioned something early in the book too about flashbulb memories. And to those who might not understand what that is in the scientific community, can you talk about that a little bit?
It's a reliving of an experience that has already happened, and it's different from deja vu.
Mm-hmm.
We all have sometimes we have those experiences of deja vu of, oh, I've been here before, this has happened before. In a flashbulb memory, the experience is literally taking over our brain, and we're reliving it in the moment, from everything we're hearing, seeing, smelling, tasting, touching, all the way down to our somatosensory or body response, the body memories of the encoding and the thoughts, the feelings of all of it. And when it happens, it's extremely disorienting because our brain has lost sight of the present moment,
Mm-hmm.
and we're back in the past. And it's really, really painful. And for so many people who don't know what they are but experience them because that happens in trauma, it's extremely crazy making.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
really, that's when we have to show up for Amy and say, all is
I
well.
know,
This is not
girl.
happening. It happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
And really having the tools, of which there are many out there. It doesn't have to just be havening, obviously. It's what you
Yeah.
want to put in your little brain candy jar, as I call it. Pull out what you need
Yes.
in that moment. And just a side note, that those listening, there is a wonderful toolkit that Dr. Kate is offering. It's Keep Breathing Healing Companion Toolkit. That is a free resource. It's a wonderful download. I highly recommend you grab this, in addition to Keep Breathing, the book, which is coming out in April. And it's Keep Breathing, a psychologist's intimate journey through loss, trauma, and rediscovering life. And I'll have that book as well as Healing in Your Hands available. These are both two wonderful books to put in your library when you need them. Read them more than once. I know this book, just from starting to read it, it'll be one of those books I want to read again, because it's such an intimate journey. And I think this is the kind of book that every time you read it, you find something new, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Well, and that was the hope in
yeah.
integrating the science, is really helping people partner with their
Mm.
brains and have a theoretical construct for all of those wackadoodle things that
Yeah.
happen, and being able to say, oh, okay, Amy, the amygdala, Amy's having a really hard day, or this is happening, that is happening, and being able to reconstruct not just the past, but also find through lines into how to create the present. And that's where the Healing in Your Hands book is a lovely companion as well.
Yeah. We will share both,
Those,
definitely.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
What is it that you're hoping to see happen with Keep Breathing that might be different from Healing in Your Hands? With us being authors and sharing our journeys and sharing what we know and wanting to put it out there in the world, we just want to help people, right?
Mhm.
What's the difference between your first book, Healing in Your Hands, and where you're hoping to take Keep Breathing?
Healing in Your Hands is a healing journey, and it utilizes the self-havening touch as a mechanism of action to empower an entire suite of neurobiological healing tools. And so that is really about partnering and guiding one's own healing journey through the lens of a lot of the clients' case studies that I've worked with. And it was so much fun writing it. Keep Breathing, on the other hand, my vision really was to do a trauma-informed version of The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel
Mm-hmm.
van der Kolk, because that is a phenomenal book, but it was originally intended for clinicians. And it's become the Bible of understanding trauma for very good reason. It's beautifully written and extremely well informed, and yet it can be a really tough read for people who have trauma. And to take the Brene Brown framework and integrate it into the science, which then basically became kind of me building out my own story every step of the way, which Brene does so beautifully, in order to reduce shame and enhance self-connection. So really the vision for Keep Breathing is to have a trauma-informed, safe way for people to learn about what's happening in their mind-body system and multiple different levels, not just traumatic loss and grief, because grief is weird. There's so many weird things about grief and loss that feel crazy making. And I use the word crazy with a deep love and care, because that's a term I've given to myself for, going on 40 years now. And so I've partnered with that term because it can feel pretty chaotic, which is what crazy is. Like, what's happening? But to also help people see that they're not alone.
Yeah.
And we need that more than ever.
And there's humor in the healing anyway, right?
Yeah.
So whether it's crazy, wackadoodle, what's the other term you say?
Crazy Pants McGee.
Crazy Pants McGee. I think that's the title of another book.
Yeah,
right?
I see that coming. Crazy Pants McGee.
But when we find the humor in the healing, we're kind of taking ourselves out of it in the moment, right? Almost like what you said about the flashbulb, the landscape of where our brain is taking us in that moment, making us think like the fender bender that we're going through the intersection of where we had a fender bender once is actually happening right now, right? And being able to see, oh, okay, I'm okay, I'm safe, I'm good, I might be crazy pants McGee at the moment, but just holding space for ourselves in that area, I think, is really important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, Hilary.
Yeah.
And beautifully stated, because those behavioral responses, those flashbulb memories, they're there through an evolutionary construct.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, such useful information when our brain is grappling with depression and anxiety or suicidal considerations, or just trying to find a way to keep breathing fundamentally. Because our brain's good at keeping us alive. It's its number one job. It's not so good at reading the instruction manuals that the 21st century has handed to us for a thriving life.
Mm-hmm. And making things more conversational. Like you said, The Body Keeps the Score is a great book. It is a lot to read, right? And then you think about the books that Brene Brown has put out there, which have a little bit more lightheartedness. It's like you're sitting down having a conversation with her.
Yeah.
But you're blending the two in a way that makes this a much more conversational yet scientific exploration into a personal psychologist journey. Oh, that's pretty good, actually. I like how I just said that.
Yeah, that was beautiful.
But
I'm just going to pause on
you
that.
You can have it. You have, for the longest time, in every email, many times in some of your posts even, have used the term Phoenix Rising, the Phoenix Rising. Where did you come up with that? And I know that's a real thing, but why is it so closely attached to Kate?
Way back in my sweet young teenage years, I adopted the spirit animal, the cockroach. And context of that is cockroaches can withstand anything. You cut their head off, they will live for 2 more weeks. I got to go in a deep dive researching cockroaches when I decided to put this in the book, because everybody's like, you need to give context for that. And of course, it hit the cutting room floor. It's not, the context isn't even there.
We'll keep it in here for you.
Yeah,
it's here.
Thank you. Use the data. They're gritty, intense creatures. And by the time I was 18, I think I'd almost died around 9 times. And I don't go into depth around all of it, but there's just been a lot.
Yeah.
And when I met John, he kind of took a stand against me around the whole concept of the cockroach, and said, that's not exactly the best framework, because they're survivors. And I'd always been a huge fan of Greek mythology and mythical creatures, and leaning into narrative and story. And then one day when I was in the throes of a really, really deep panic attack, I remember feeling that it felt like my body was on fire, which is how panic can often feel. And I had severe debilitating social anxiety. That's how I started in the rat labs, because rats are friendly, they're kind, they don't judge.
Mm-hmm.
Humans were terrifying. And it just started to shift for me, this space of, I keep going into the flames. I keep feeling like I'm burning up, but I keep coming out. Oh, the phoenix. And so that was a totem I started to try on. And then when I met my now partner, Naz, who I know you've met and hung out with and Irish danced with
We
in
did.
Ireland.
Who are you kidding? You were the one. You were the one that was killing it in the Irish dancing.
Well, no, that was Kim. That was Kim.
I don't know. Anyway, yes, knowing Naz, he's great. Yeah.
On our very first date, we were chatting, and he shared with me that he had a totem of the phoenix, and he survived and been through a lot, and growing up in India and religious wars and just being exposed to a lot of really painful, complex things. And it was this bonding moment that we had of, you know what, there will be ashes, there will be fires, and, you know, pain into power, wounds into wisdom. And then, because I'm just going to keep talking, Hilary, do you know what a group of phoenixes is called?
I'm not even going to guess.
An odyssey.
Oh, I like that. You mentioned that in the book.
I do.
Yes.
I do. And so this was something I'd known for a little while. And then when I met Ranit, started doing havening and moving into this new way of being in the world. And I had phoenixes along the way of my journey. I started noticing this collective community of an odyssey. And from there, it's just expanded beyond the havening community, which is phenomenal and amazing, into this larger global collective that I walk alongside. And these are all humans who have been in the flames. I don't know a single human who has done their work that hasn't burned up. And the reason I caveat done their work is being a phoenix means you are aware that you burned.
Oh, yes.
And the scars are things you're proud of.
Yeah, the first step to any change is the awareness, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, love that.
And rather than being, and the transition to the phoenix is, wait, I'm not going to be ashamed. I'm not going to judge myself. I'm not going to be stuck in self-loathing. And if I do get stuck there, because we do as humans, I'm also going to lean into my village, my odyssey. That's the story of the phoenix.
Love that. And you mentioned that in the beginning of the book when I was first reading your acknowledgments. You had that it was somewhat of a dedication to your odyssey, right?
Yeah, it is literally. I think it's the actual dedication.
It is the dedication. I just didn't want to leave anyone out. But I remember reading that, going, "Oh, I love this."
Yeah, to my village, my odyssey. Yeah, may we continue to rise, phoenix up.
I love that, Kate. The other thing, I love that you do mention Naz, because I was going to bring him into this anyway, and in that way that you're writing this book, it's really, while it's not just about the grief and loss of a partner that you had, there's so much more to the book. But how has it been to be in another relationship, referencing back to an older relationship, and feel vulnerable enough to share it without feeling that you're possibly impacting the relationship you're in now?
Yeah, and it's interesting you highlight that, because that's something my mom has consistently brought up ever since I met Naz. She's like, don't talk about John, don't, and and from the most loving, caring space. And Naz is a very specifically, uniquely human. I have no better way to say it.
He's pretty cool.
He's pretty cool. Yeah, he's pretty cool. And from the very, it's interesting. I told him on our second date that I knew I would never be able to biologically have children. I didn't tell him about John until our 10th date, because that on our second date was information that he needed to have so he could make a specific choice about whether or not he wanted to continue the relationship, as my body had considerations.
Yeah.
With John, I was so mindful that I didn't want to be that person, that whatever my brain said that person was. Mm-hmm. And when I started telling him about what had happened, he consistently showed up in a space that was just, it's a part of your story.
Yeah.
I want to know as much as you feel comfortable sharing. And that's been his through line from day one. And writing this book, I kept checking with him because he did let me write about him in the book. He's in the book, and he's deeply, deeply, deeply private. Mm-hmm. He's one of the most private people I've ever met in my life. And so I kept reading him excerpts that he's in. And in his own cheeky way, sometimes now he'll quote them back to me. I'd be like, don't forget.
Page 300 or 200, you said.
Right. Sometimes I see more than you think. Hilary, literally, he said that to me last night.
I love it. That's a good connection.
It'll be fun, they say.
What's that?
Yeah, write a book.
Write a book and what?
Write a book. It'll be fun, they say.
Right.
But, I mean, I think the best way to describe it is he's seen all of these weird universal idiosyncrasies and just been there for all of them. And even this diamond that I wear, Nas gifted me last year for, he gave me two necklaces, one for anniversary, one for Valentine's Day. And this is the engagement ring that John gave me. This is the diamond. And then he gifted me another necklace that has the diamonds that would have been on my wedding band with John. And he was just saying, John's always with you.
Yeah.
Like, he's your angel. He's always with you. And I mean, that's not.
That's more than just a confident human being. That's someone that gets it. It's someone who realizes that that's part of your story. And you're here. And you two are together now because it's exactly where you're supposed to be now, right? Yeah. It's like that quote that, what is it? I was just sharing this today with a client. Life will give you whatever experiences are most helpful for the evolution of your consciousness. How do you know it's the right experience? Because you're having it. That's Eckhart, right? And That's a good one because you sit there and you're like, why is this happening? And then you think, oh, it's happening because it's happening, right? Nas came into your life when he did because he was meant to be there when he's there. Mm-hmm. So the reference back to something that is still part of the is, but it's not the now.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And
I do. And John, the week before he died, and this is a story that it was one of the hardest stories to write in the book. He had said, I've always known I was going to die young. And I was so mad. And literally driving on the freeway, pulled off onto the shoulder of the freeway. I was so mad. And he wasn't suicidal or anything. It was just this deadpan. And John had a certitude when he spoke about certain things. Like, he was a joyful, I mean, he's an April Fool's baby. And he embodied everything you could imagine about an April Fool's baby, which is why the book coming out on April 2nd is so precious. And he said this, and he looked at me and he said, and you will find great love and I'll let you know. You have to. And my inner 13-year-old's going, you're going to die alone and I'll die first. And he's just like, you will know.
When you look back on that now, how does that impact you?
Oh, he let me know.
Yeah. It's a greater awareness sometimes people have. We don't even realize it, you know?
Yeah. It's a larger universal connection. And the chapter 2 opens up with a quote from John. And do you mind if I read it?
Oh, please do.
It's so poignant.
And while Kate's finding that, just a reminder that Keep Breathing, Healing Companion Toolkit, she's giving that away. That's a free resource that is available to you. It will go beautifully with the book. What a beautiful companion to the book. So we'll have that in the podcast notes, as well as links to the book, which this book, Keep Breathing, drops on the 2nd of April. And then there's also the other book, Healing in Your Hands, that we'll share as well, because it's why not have both? Right? Why not have Kate the Great in your pocket whenever you need her? But
that's the goal.
That is the goal. If only we could have Kate the Great all the time.
And on the drktruitt.com, we're cultivating a library of free resources.
Love that. We'll share all of that.
Toolkits there. Yeah, we have a bunch of neuroplasticity exercises, because healing and the life journey is not just about healing the past.
Yeah. Beautiful.
We also have the opportunity to build the future.
So quote
John. Yes. So the chapter's called Tomorrow Begins, and this is starting the morning after I found him and I couldn't save his life. And the quote is, "In the transformation from flesh to earth, we see the symbolic form of transcendence, suggesting its inevitability, whether we see it as fit."
He said that. Mm-hmm. And you remember that.
Yeah, he said this when he was like 23.
And you remember that.
I have a trunk. He was also a prolific writer.
Yeah.
And so for context, I was in the hospital when I was in my early 20s, and he sent me a 3-ring binder that was this thick of remember AOL Instant Messenger?
Oh, yes.
AIM? Of our AIM conversations, because texting didn't exist yet.
You're dating us.
And and it was all of our conversations. I still have that. And so when I started writing the book, I went back through, which was a real journey into just my soul. And that was one of the quotes that I found from a poem that he'd written when he was in his early 20s.
It's quite extraordinary to think that the internet could be, well, contrasting, right? Positive and negative, because it allows us to really go into the digital library and Rolodex of things that we might normally have to find in a huge library. And it could take hours and hours. In fact, suddenly I just went back to, I had a flashbulb moment. Nice. But a good one.
And it was
a good one. Yes, it was when we were at the library on the campus of Trinity University in Dublin, and that library. I remember looking around while we were there, when we went on that tour, and thinking, how in the world do you find what you need in this place? Back in the day, we're talking hundreds of years ago, and we're of the Dewey Decimal System age, right? But now everything is just so at our fingertips with the digital age. It really gives us the opportunity to transport ourselves to a place that maybe we have not been to in a very long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And reviewing the stories and the conversations that we had, and I brought a couple into the book because they're just such, in hindsight, going back to your question, and how when I think about what he said now, there's so many flickers to Eckhart Tolle's beautiful point of what was to come, and that quantum physics, human consciousness integration. Yeah.
With this book being so personal and understanding authoring a book, was this one you did completely yourself, or did you find it helpful to have somebody?
Oh, good. No. No. I was on the phone till 4 a.m. sometimes with friends as I was writing it. Rebecca, who many people who've been to our trainings knows Rebecca very well. She's one of my lead trainers, also just a chosen sister and family member, a fellow Phoenix. She really incredibly helped me tune some of the harder parts of my family's narrative. Every step of the way was in conversation with my parents, because we do unpack the family story and the narrative. And it was critical to me that I be very respectful of every human's journey. Nobody has intended harm despite the experiences that occurred. And how do we honor and hold space for that? And the ancestral journey of all of that transgenerational trauma. So my parents were a huge voice within all of it. Rebecca really played a critical role in identifying some key ways to present some information that would sponsor the story and honor everybody's unique stories. I keep saying the word story, but that's really
but that's what pictures. It is. And also, I've found that there are, well, we all have a story, right? Every single one of us. Yeah. Not everyone's going to pen a book. Not everyone's going to talk about it. And part of the difficulty might be for fear of saying or hurting somebody because you are sharing your truth, right?
Yeah.
And
well, and with John's family, it was so important to me to be respectful. Because I could tell the story that I lived with him, and they were my family for 10 years. And during many of those years, they were more my family than my own family. And to share the information I was sharing, how do I do that in a respectful, kind, loving manner? And also not unpack any information that wasn't mine to share. And walking that very fine line. And I was very grateful that when I was going through that huge binder, one of the things that John repeatedly circled back to was a permission that I didn't know would happen 10, 15 years later of, you have to tell your story. And whatever version of my story is a part of that, tell it. And there, that refrain shows up over and over and over again, going all the way back to when I was 20, 21 years old.
Kate, this is such a gift. It's going to help many. And I imagine it continues to help you.
Yeah.
You know?
It does. This helps me. Thank you, Hilary.
Well, it helps me too. I think we learn from each other, you know?
We do.
And that's so much of what community connection, the Odyssey is. Right. So I'm so glad that you brought that up, because that was definitely an important piece. Before we go, you know I do this. Yes. You know it's coming. I hope you haven't been writing down words too, because I want to do our little rapid fire. As you know, for those who are new to the Holistically Speaking podcast, I do a game called Rapid Fire at the end where I write down words that were said by our lovely guests and want to think about the first word that comes to their beautiful brains. So, not always positive, not always negative. Just is.
Doesn't matter.
It's human. It's just a word, right? Yeah. So here we go. You ready?
Yes.
Okay. Some of them might be 2 words, but anyway.
You're already changing the rules.
Right, because you've been on before, so I got to change it up for you.
Okay.
All right. Well, why don't we start with Odyssey?
Village.
Breathing.
Life.
Wackadoodle.
Laugh.
Because that's our favorite word. Amy.
Superhero.
Belonging.
Hard won.
Safety.
Hard won.
Success.
Complicated.
Oh, you didn't? Okay, you changed it up a little bit. All right. Yeah. She's throwing me for a loop. Okay. Community.
Odyssey.
Self-love.
Hard won. Can I keep using the same one? If it's
you can do whatever you want. There are no rules.
All right.
You make the rules. Just play the game. That's the rule.
Okay.
Grief.
Oh, that's a hard one. Especially because I'm running this huge workshop and I've been knee deep in all of the science of grief. Grief, it's part of life. It needs to be a part of the conversation.
Yeah. 2 words, childhood trauma.
Heartbreaking.
Suicidal.
The escape hatch.
Phoenix.
Wounds into wisdom, baby.
Yeah, we're closing on that. Love that. Beautiful. I adore you. I really do. I have not ever had a guest come on more than once. So
I did
congratulations.
Not know that. So thank you.
Yes. Hey. I mean, look, you know that this show is my baby. It is my heart's work. And I do get a lot of people that want to be in this space. And I'm so grateful for that. But to be able to have you back on and share this other part of Dr. Kate Truitt, to me felt just so natural. Right? So I adore you. I admire you. You are such a mentor and such a spark of wisdom, and just there's just so many ways I could describe you, Kate the Great. But thank you for being here. Thank you for everything you are putting out there in the world. And just a reminder, we will share everything in the podcast notes, including Dr. Kate Truitt's free resources, the book Keep Breathing, even Healing in Your Hands if you haven't heard about it. But go back and listen to that podcast episode, which was, I think, 101. But I can't be certain of that. But we'll put that in there.
Good memory.
I know. It was in the hundreds, early hundreds. Yeah. Now we're at 149. So look where we are.
Of course you are.
And I just want to give you a moment to share some final words with those tuning in.
It's not going to be too different from what I think I wrapped up our last conversation with, which is fundamentally, Hilary, just be gentle. You know, if we're all a little more gentle with ourselves, it's a skill. It's not frequently something we're taught, and it's the game changer. It's being human and living in a human world is complicated. And when we're soft and we're gentle with ourselves, it opens up entirely new opportunities for connection, for growth, and for inspiration and life, really.
Gentle is such a beautiful word. As you were saying that and just speaking the word, it really, you know how words have feelings, like colors? Yep. Just hearing you say the word gentle, it just seemed nurturing and loving.
Yeah.
That's a really beautiful word. And leaving with that, I like that. That's where we're going. Good deal. Yeah. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you. Joy and an honor.
Always. All right, my sunshine, it's time to be a part of that odyssey that Dr. Kate Truitt talks about. Grab a copy of her latest book, Keep Breathing, a psychologist's intimate journey through loss, trauma, and rediscovering life. This book actually releases on April 2nd, but there is a link in the podcast notes of this episode to pre-order the book now. You can also download a free companion toolkit, the Keep Breathing Healing Companion Toolkit. It's a free download that Dr. Kate is offering, a beautiful complement to her book, Keep Breathing. That is also in the podcast notes as well. In addition to Dr. Kate's first book, which is Healing in Your Hands, a beautiful way to learn more about self-havening and how you can self-regulate to self-heal. We talked about that on episode 109 of the Holistically Speaking podcast. So I'm not only going to add the book, I'm going to add the podcast episode so you can find that as well. And if you're curious about havening, if you want to learn more about how havening can support you on your healing journey, let's hug it out. All you have to do is set up a little time with me, and we'll see if that modality aligns with you. Holistically Speaking is edited by Two Market Media with music by Lipbone Redding and supported by you. So thank you for trusting me with your time and with your mind. And as Dr. Kate shared so beautifully, be gentle with yourself. And when you need help, the Odyssey, the community, they're awaiting you. So know that you are supported, that you are beautiful just the way you are, and that I love you, I believe in you, and I will see you next week. Be well.
I know the girl with mountains